Every trucker who's driven long routes at night has a road they hate. A stretch that's too long, too dark, too empty, the kind that makes your skin crawl for no reason you can point to, even after 100 uneventful trips down it. The man in this story had a road like that. Nothing had ever happened to him on it, not once in years of driving it, until the night in the winter of 2001, when he ended up losing his truck, his job, his safety, and, for a few surreal hours, his entire understanding of who was and wasn't still alive. By the end of that night, he'd be sitting at a wedding table, eating food he'd never dreamed existed, seated across from people who had just told him, quite calmly, that they weren't people at all. This is Jack's story. Stay with me till the end, because the ending is stranger than you're expecting. Jack worked at a factory that produced and shipped goods, and his job, loading trucks and driving them out to other cities, was about as ordinary as work gets. Long hours, long roads, the kind of job you do on autopilot after enough years behind the wheel. There was one route in particular that always sat wrong with him. Nothing he could name specifically. No bad experience, no near miss, no reason grounded in anything that had actually happened. Just a feeling, the kind you learn not to argue with even when you can't explain it. A low hum of dread every single time he pulled onto that stretch of road. He'd never once had trouble on it. That's important to remember. Whatever instinct was warning him, it wasn't based on history. It was based on something else entirely. Something that, on this particular winter night in 2001, turned out to be exactly right. It was fully dark by the time he set out. The kind of dark you only get on a long, rural road far from any town. No streetlights, no other headlights, nothing but his own beams cutting a narrow tunnel through the night. He knew this road well. He'd driven it more times than he could count, and still, that same old feeling of dread sat in his chest the entire way, heavier than usual, though he couldn't have told you why. Partway into the drive, he saw something up ahead, a strong, sudden light, bright enough that his stomach dropped instantly. His cargo was valuable. Out on an empty road like this, in the middle of the night, a bright light appearing from nowhere meant one thing to him immediately. Highwaymen, robbers, waiting for exactly this kind of isolated truck on exactly this kind of empty stretch. But the light vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He told himself it was exhaustion, his eyes playing tricks after too many hours on the road, and he kept driving, trying to shake the unease building in his chest. Then, a small white car pulled out in front of him, cutting directly across his path. He had to slam the brakes, and in that instant, his fear curdled into fury. He genuinely believed for a moment that he was about to die, that this car had just nearly caused a fatal crash for no reason at all. He looked out through his window, scanning the scene, and when he was sure there was only one person visible near the car, something in him snapped from fear straight into rage. He grabbed a thin stick he kept in the cab, not much of a weapon, but something, and climbed down out of his truck, shouting at the man to get out of the car, to explain himself, ready to give him a piece of his mind for nearly getting them both killed. The man stepped out, and he smiled. Not a nervous smile, not an apologetic one, a knowing smile. The exact expression of someone watching another person walk directly into a trap they've already set. Like he was thinking, there it is, you fell for it. He asked Jack, casually, almost politely, to hand over whatever he had. Jack laughed in his face. He raised his stick, thinking he had the upper hand. One man, one flimsy weapon between them, and Jack was bigger, angrier, and convinced he had nothing to be afraid of. That's when he heard it. Voices, a whole group of them coming from the car. A car that, moments earlier, had appeared to hold exactly one person. They came out of the dark all at once, more people than should have reasonably fit inside that small white car, and they split into two groups without any visible signal or communication. Some closing in on Jack directly, others heading straight for his truck to start unloading the cargo. The ones who came for Jack hit him hard, far harder than he expected from their builds, far stronger than any group of ordinary highway robbers had any right to be. He tried to fight back, tried to use his stick, tried to hold his ground the way he had in the seconds before, when he still thought he understood what kind of situation he was in. It didn't work. He was outnumbered and outmatched, and somewhere in the chaos of the beating, a single thought cut through the panic and pain. Get away, now, while no one's watching you specifically. He ran. Into the dark, away from the road, away from the truck, away from everything he'd been sent out to protect. I know what you might be thinking. That running was the wrong call, that most people would tell you to stay, let them take what they want, and hope they leave you alone once they have it. That's the conventional wisdom. Jack had a feeling that said the opposite, a feeling telling him, clearly and urgently, that staying was the more dangerous choice. For the first time in his life, that instinct turned out to be exactly right. Behind him, in the dark, he heard the fire start. They burned the truck. Cargo, cab, everything. Jack stood there in the freezing dark, watching the glow of his burning truck shrink behind him as he put more distance between himself and the road, and he had no idea what to do next. This was, in the most literal sense, his own fault, and he knew it. His company had strict rules about never stopping on stretches of empty road like that one, precisely because of situations like this. He'd broken that rule. He didn't want to face the consequences, didn't want to explain to his company, or worse, to the police, exactly how he'd let this happen. Somewhere in his exhausted, panicked mind, prison felt like a very real, very immediate possibility. So instead of doubling back toward the nearest town, instead of trying to find help, he simply ran. Mindlessly, without a plan, without any real destination. Just movement, just distance, just trying to outrun a situation he had no idea how to face. Eventually, he came across an abandoned structure, barely more than a single room, half collapsed, clearly untouched by anyone in years. He considered staying there, but a new fear crept in almost immediately. What if someone found him there? What if the highwaymen doubled back looking for him, or the police came searching and found him hiding like a guilty man? So he moved again, further out, until he found a large rock formation, and there, exhausted, thirsty, and hungry, he finally stopped. He tried to sleep. It didn't come easily. Not with the cold, not with the hunger, and not with the sound that started drifting toward him sometime in the night. Music. Traditional wedding music, the kind you'd hear at a village celebration, completely and jarringly out of place, given where he was and what he'd just survived. He was still trying to make sense of that sound when a woman appeared, leading a donkey loaded down with bottles of water and clay jars. She noticed him immediately, sitting there against the rock, and walked straight over. "What are you doing here, alone?" she asked. "You look tired." Scared. He couldn't find the words to answer her. He was too exhausted, too far past the edge of whatever normal reaction he might have had left in him. Then she said something that should have stopped him cold if he'd had the energy left to really process it. "We knew you were coming," she said. "We waited for you." At the time, in his state, it barely registered as strange. He was too depleted to interrogate a stranger's odd choice of words. Instead, she told him she was on her way to a wedding nearby. She worked there, bringing water, and that no one would hurt him if he came with her. She'd be right there. He wouldn't be alone. He asked her for some water first. She gave it to him. And then, because he genuinely felt he had no better option, no truck, no job, no plan, nowhere else to go, and a woman offering safety in a night that had already taken everything else from him, he went with her. They welcomed him warmly when he arrived, genuinely warmly, with none of the suspicion or wariness you'd expect toward a stranger stumbling in from the dark in the middle of the night. But underneath that warmth, something about the whole scene sat wrong with him from the start. The bride and groom were both dressed in black. Not the traditional colors you'd expect at any wedding he'd ever attended. Black, head to toe, on both of them. The guests danced, but the movements were subtly off, a rhythm that almost matched normal wedding dancing but didn't quite land right, like watching something performed from memory rather than instinct. He tried not to focus on it too hard. He was tired, he told himself. He was in shock. His judgment about what looked normal probably wasn't reliable right now anyway. He sat with a group of guests, and they began talking with him easily, warmly, and then greeted him by name. He hadn't told them his name. He brushed past that detail too in the moment, the same way he'd brushed past the woman's strange comment about already knowing he was coming. He simply told them his name himself, as if he'd been the one to offer it, and let the moment pass. They fed him. Food unlike anything he had ever eaten in his life or even imagined. Flavors he had no framework for. A meal that felt less like a wedding dinner and more like something built specifically, impossibly, to be the most extraordinary thing he'd ever tasted. They told him to relax, to make himself at home. And somewhere in the middle of that strange, warm, wrong hospitality, a single clear thought cut through his exhaustion. If these people had wanted to hurt him, they'd had every opportunity already, back at the abandoned house, in the dark, when no one would have known. They hadn't. So, for now, he stayed. They told him they would help him. Not just shelter for the night, real help. They said they'd help him escape the mess his broken company rule had created, and that they'd even pay back everything the company had lost when the truck burned. That should have been the moment his suspicion kicked in hardest, and to be fair to him, it did. How could a group of strangers at a rural wedding possibly know the specifics of his situation? His job, his broken rule, the exact legal trouble he might be facing? How could people out here, in what seemed like a small, isolated village, understand the details of corporate liability and law well enough to promise they could fix it? He asked them directly. Their answer is the moment this story stops being simply strange and becomes something else entirely. "We'll help you," they told him, "if you help us first. But first, you need to prepare yourself for what we're about to tell you." He waited. "We're not human," they said. "We're ghosts." I want you to imagine actually hearing that, not reading it. Hearing it calmly from a table full of people who had just fed you, laughed with you, danced in front of you all night. People who, up until that exact sentence, had seemed as solid and real as anyone you'd ever met. Jack said his legs nearly gave out where he sat. They moved quickly to reassure him. They promised, clearly and repeatedly, that they had no intention of hurting him. And given everything he'd already survived that night, the beating, the burning truck, hours alone in the freezing dark, he found that he genuinely had no better option than to trust them. So he did. They explained their situation. They were a family, they told him, bound together even beyond death, and long ago a magician had summoned them for his own selfish purposes. But because they were not by nature harmful spirits, because they refused, even under his control, to hurt anyone on his behalf, the magician had trapped them instead, sealing them away inside a cave with an enchantment designed to hold them there permanently. His job, they told him, was to help free them. Only a living human could do what needed to be done, because the spirits sealed inside that cave alongside them were far more dangerous, stronger, older, actively harmful, and simply being trapped in proximity to them was, slowly, burning away at the gentler family trapped with them. Jack didn't feel like he had any real option left. He agreed to help. They led him to the cave that night. A massive stone sealed the entrance. Old, heavy, clearly not something any ordinary group of people could move by hand. If he opened it, they warned him, the more dangerous spirits trapped alongside the family would be released as well, and their presence alone would burn the gentler spirits who'd been trapped beside them all this time. They walked him through exactly what he needed to do. He would need copper, incense, and 2 goats, 1 male, 1 female. They gave him money to buy everything, and they were firm and specific about one condition. He was not to speak to anyone else about any of it, not while he gathered the supplies, not on the way back. He did as they instructed. He bought what was needed and returned to the cave. Under their direction, he melted the copper over the sealed rock, arranged exactly as they'd shown him. He took the blood of the 2 goats and poured it across the stone in the pattern they described. Somewhere in the process, the magician's original inscription, the words that had sealed the cave in the first place, became visible on the rock surface, and Jack watched as it seemed to respond to what he was doing. He followed every instruction, precisely in order, and it worked. The rock split and gave way. In the same moment, he heard a wave of crying voices rise up from inside the cave, and then the family of spirits who had led him there moved past him into the opening, disappearing inside. A moment later, a different group emerged from within. The ones who had been trapped alongside them finally freed as well. Then the rock sealed itself shut again, as though it had never been broken at all. Jack stood there in the aftermath, his mind reeling, half convinced that after everything he'd just done, this was the moment they would turn on him. He'd freed dangerous, unfamiliar spirits from a sealed cave using blood and copper and a stranger's whispered instructions in the middle of the night, completely alone. Every instinct told him this was the part where it went wrong. "Now it's your turn," they told him, and they gave him a substantial amount of gold, more than he'd ever held or expected to hold in his life. Jack made his way back to civilization, and the first thing he did was go to the police. He told them what he could of the truth: the highwaymen, the ambush, the burned truck, leaving out, understandably, the parts involving spirits, sealed caves, and a wedding attended entirely by the dead. He used the gold to pay his company back in full for everything that had been lost that night. The company fired him anyway. After everything, the honesty, the repayment, the years of otherwise ordinary work, they let him go. But he still had the gold. What remained of it after settling his debts was enough to start something entirely new. He bought several trucks of his own and opened his own transport business, built from nothing but the wreckage of the worst night of his life and the strange, impossible kindness of a family who told him, calmly, over a wedding dinner, that they weren't human at all. That's Jack's story as he tells it. A road he always dreaded, for reasons he could never explain, that finally lived up to every ounce of that dread on one winter night in 2001. A truck he lost, a beating he barely survived, and, somehow, on the same night, a debt he could never have imagined repaying, settled by a family of gentle spirits, trapped by someone else's cruelty, who needed one living stranger willing to trust them enough to set them free. He walked away from that night with nothing and came out the other side with a business of his own. I don't know what to make of stories like this one. Whether every detail happened exactly as told, whether fear and exhaustion reshaped some of it in the retelling, or whether there's something underneath all of it that's simply true in a way we don't have good language for. What do you think about it? If this story pulled you in the way it pulled me in while I was putting it together, let me know in the comments. I especially want to hear what you make of that wedding and whether you'd have taken the water from a stranger who tells you she already knew you were coming. If you want more stories like this one, subscribe and turn on notifications, because there are more roads, more strangers, and more things waiting in the dark coming soon on this channel. Until next time, stay safe out there. And if a stretch of road has always felt wrong to you for no reason you can explain, trust it.